The morning sun hadn't cleared the ridge when Vivian Hale's bedroom window swung open to the prairie wind, curtains snapping like accusations. Her bed sat perfectly made, hadn't been slept in. The white wedding dress that cost her father 3 months of cattle profits hung abandoned on the wardrobe door, still pristine, still waiting for a bride who was already 50 miles gone. Norah found the note first. It sat propped against Vivian's vanity mirror, her sister's elaborate handwriting mocking in its cheerfulness. Gone to find something better. Tell Daddy I'm sorry. Tell Caleb he'll thank me someday. V. Norah's hands shook as she read it. Not from surprise. Vivian had been restless for months, complaining about the wedding, about Black Ridge, about being trapped in a life she never wanted. No, Norah shook because she knew exactly what was coming next. The scandal, the rage, the humiliation that would rain down on everyone Vivian left behind. And somehow she knew it would land hardest on her. Norah! Her father's voice exploded from downstairs. Where's your sister? She descended the stairs slowly, note in hand, watching Thomas Hale pace the parlor like a caged animal. He'd already dressed for the wedding, new suit, polished boots, the silver watch chain he only wore for important occasions. Behind him, the housekeeper stood wringing her hands, and Norah's mother sat motionless in her chair, face drained of color. She's gone, Papa. The words hung in the air like smoke. Thomas snatched the note from her hand, read it once, then crumpled it in his fist. When? Sometime in the night. Her bed's not touched. Damn her. His voice came out strangled. Damn her to hell. Norah's mother finally spoke, voice thin as paper. What do we tell them? The truth. Thomas threw the crumpled note across the room. What else can we tell them? She's run off like some common... He caught himself, jaw working. Get dressed, Norah. We're going to that church. Papa, maybe we should... Now. 20 minutes later, the Hale family carriage rolled toward town in absolute silence. Norah sat across from her parents, wearing the pale blue dress her mother had picked out weeks ago. Something modest and appropriate for the younger sister who'd be sitting in the family pew, watching Vivian marry into the most powerful ranch family in the territory. Except Vivian wouldn't be there. And everyone would know why. The church sat on this hill overlooking Black Ridge, white paint gleaming in the morning sun, bell tower casting shadows across the cemetery where 3 generations of frontier families lay buried. Carriages already crowded the yard. The Mercers had arrived early, naturally, along with the Blackwoods, the Sterlings, the Fairfaxes. Every family that mattered in 300 miles had come to witness the union of 2 ranching empires. Norah watched her father's face drain of blood as they approached. Thomas. Sheriff Morrison intercepted them before they reached the church steps, hat in his hands, expression grim. We need to talk. Not now, Jack. It's about your daughter. Thomas went very still. You know? Half the town knows. One of the stable boys saw her riding out last night with that gambler who's been dealing cards at the Silver Dollar. He recognized the horse. Keep your voice down. Yea, iski, what dates? It's too late for that. Morrison glanced toward the church. The Mercers are already asking questions. Caleb's been standing at that altar for 20 minutes wondering where his bride is. Norah felt sick. Her father straightened his shoulders, aging 10 years in the span of a breath. I'll tell them myself. Thomas, maybe you should... But her father was already walking toward the church. Inside, 200 people packed the pews in their finest clothes. Flowers covered every surface. White roses, prairie lilies, sprigs of sage tied with cream ribbon. The territorial judge stood near the altar in his ceremonial robes, and there, waiting beside his father and 3 younger brothers, stood Caleb Mercer. Norah had seen him before, of course. Everyone in Black Ridge knew the Mercers, but she'd never been this close, never really looked at him as anything other than a fixture of the powerful family that controlled half the territory's water rights and most of its political connections. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders. His dark hair was combed back from a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't currently tight with barely controlled tension. He wore a black suit that fit him perfectly, and his hands, scarred from ranch work, not soft like the businessmen who'd come from back east, kept flexing at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. He looked uncomfortable. Trapped. Norah wondered if Vivian had ever noticed. The murmuring crowd fell silent as Thomas Hale walked down the center aisle. Every step echoed. Every eye followed. Norah trailed behind her parents, wanting to disappear, knowing she couldn't. At the front of the church, Malcolm Mercer rose from his seat. Caleb's father was a bear of a man, silver-haired and hard-eyed, dressed in expensive wool despite the spring heat. His reputation preceded him, ruthless in business, controlling with his family, and absolutely unforgiving when crossed. "Where's the bride?" Malcolm's voice carried across the church. Thomas stopped 6 feet from the altar. "There's been a situation." "What kind of situation?" "My daughter. Vivian has—" Thomas seemed to choke on the words. "She's left town." The church exploded. Voices rose in shocked whispers. Women gasped. Men cursed under their breath. Someone in the back row laughed. A sharp, cruel sound quickly stifled. "Left?" Malcolm's face went dark red. "What do you mean, left?" "She ran off last night with a gambler. I found her note this morning." "You're telling me," Malcolm said slowly, dangerously, "that your daughter jilted my son at the altar in front of 200 witnesses?" "I'm telling you I'm sorry." Thomas's voice cracked. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't—" "Sorry?" Malcolm moved forward like a predator. "You think sorry fixes this? You think sorry erases the humiliation? The insult to my family?" "Malcolm, please." "This wedding was a contract, a business arrangement. Your cattle operation is drowning in debt, Thomas. You needed this alliance as much as we did. More, probably." The crowd went completely silent now, everyone straining to hear. Thomas flinched. "I know what was at stake." "Then you know what happens next." Malcolm's smile was vicious. "You owe me compensation for this disgrace. Breach of contract. Damage to my family's reputation. I'll see you in court, and I'll take everything. Your land, your cattle, every asset you've got." "Malcolm, be reasonable. I'm being generous. I could have you blacklisted from every sale yard and bank in the territory. Your family would be finished in a month." Norah watched her father crumble, watched him realize that Vivian's selfishness hadn't just embarrassed them. It had destroyed them. "I don't have anything," Thomas whispered. "The ranch is already mortgaged. The last 2 seasons wiped out our reserves. I can't." He stopped, turned, looked directly at Norah. "No." Her blood went cold. "I have another daughter." The church seemed to tilt. "Papa," Norah heard herself say. "Don't." But Thomas was already talking, words tumbling out in desperation. "Norah, she's 22, good family, raised proper, she can run a household, manage accounts. You're offering me your spare daughter?" Malcolm laughed, sharp and cutting. "Like she's livestock? I'm offering you a bride. The wedding's already planned. The guests are here, the food's prepared. My daughter made this mess. Let me fix it with my other daughter." "Papa, please." "Quiet, Norah." She wasn't invisible anymore. Every eye in the church turned to stare at her. 200 people examining, judging, measuring her against the sister who'd run away. She saw pity in some faces, disgust in others, amusement in too many. Someone whispered, "The plain one?" Someone else, "Poor thing never had a chance next to Vivian." Norah wanted to die. Malcolm looked her up and down like she was a horse he was considering buying. "She's not exactly—" "She's smart," Thomas interrupted desperately. "Educated, loyal. She'd make a good wife." "To someone, maybe, but not to my son." The rejection landed like a physical blow. Malcolm turned to the crowd, voice rising. "Do you hear this? Thomas Hale's daughter humiliates us, and he thinks we'll just accept whatever replacement he throws at us? This is— I'll do it." Everyone froze. Caleb had spoken for the first time since Norah entered the church. His voice was quiet, but it carried, cutting through the chaos like a knife. Malcolm spun. "What?" "I'll marry her." Caleb looked at Norah directly, and she couldn't read his expression at all. "If she'll have me." The church went silent as a grave. Malcolm's face turned purple. "Caleb, you can't be serious?" "I'm standing at this altar either way. Might as well have a bride." "This is insane. You don't even know this girl." "I didn't really know Vivian either." Something bitter crossed Caleb's face. "At least this one hasn't run off yet." "Caleb, you wanted a wedding. You wanted an alliance. Well, here it is." Caleb's jaw was set. Unless you'd rather I walk out of this church unmarried and prove to everyone in the territory that the Mercer family can't even close a simple marriage contract. Malcolm looked ready to explode, but Caleb had him cornered. Refusing now would make them look weak, would make them look like the jilted fools who couldn't salvage even this. Fine, Malcolm bit the word off. But on your head, boy. He stalked back to his seat. Everyone looked at Norah. The judge cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Hale, do you consent to this union? Did she consent? Did anyone care? Her father had already offered her up like property. The groom had already accepted. The church was waiting. Refusing would destroy her family completely. And for what? To preserve her dignity? She'd never had any to begin with. Yes, she whispered. Speak up, girl, someone called from the back. Yes? Louder this time, though her voice shook. I consent. Then let's get this over with, the judge muttered. It happened fast after that. Norah walked to the altar on legs that didn't feel like her own. Her father gave her away without looking at her. The judge recited words she didn't hear, and Caleb Mercer, stone-faced and silent, slipped a ring onto her finger that was too large, sized for Vivian's hand, not hers. You may kiss the bride. Caleb hesitated, then leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. Brief, mechanical, cold. The church erupted into awkward applause. And just like that, Norah Hale became Norah Mercer. The wedding breakfast was torture. The Mercer ranch house was enormous. 3 stories of timber and stone built to impress, to dominate. The main hall had been prepared for a celebration. Tables loaded with food, musicians in the corner, champagne flowing freely. But the atmosphere felt like a funeral. Guests clustered in small groups, whispering. Some tried to act normal, offering congratulations that rang hollow. Others didn't bother pretending, staring at Norah like she was a curiosity. A mistake. The consolation prize. She sat at the main table beside her new husband, who hadn't spoken to her since they'd left the church. Caleb ate mechanically, jaw tight, acknowledging guests with curt nods but saying nothing. His father sat on his other side, radiating fury. Smile, Malcolm hissed at one point. You look like you're at an execution. Feels like one, Caleb muttered. Norah pretended not to hear. She pushed food around her plate and tried to ignore the weight of 200 pairs of eyes. Across the table, Vivian's empty chair sat like an accusation. She always was selfish. Norah looked up. Caleb's youngest brother, Daniel, maybe? She couldn't remember, was watching her with something like sympathy. Your sister, he clarified. Vivian. Everyone knew she didn't want to go through with it. Then everyone knew more than I did. She complained about it constantly, about being sold off, about marrying someone she didn't love, about wanting adventure. Daniel shrugged. Guess she finally went and got it. Lucky her. He winced. Sorry, that came out wrong. It's fine. Norah took a sip of champagne she didn't want. At least someone got what they wanted today. The breakfast dragged on for hours. Speeches were made, awkward toasts to the happy couple, veiled references to the scandal, forced laughter that died too quickly. Norah endured it all in numb silence, aware that she was being discussed, dissected, pitied. Finally, mercifully, it ended. The guests began to leave, offering congratulations that felt more like condolences. Norah's parents departed without really saying goodbye. Her father looked ashamed, her mother looked relieved. The Hale family reputation was salvaged, barely, and that was apparently enough. By sunset, the ranch house emptied, and Norah was alone with her new husband. She found him in the study, pouring whiskey into a glass. He'd removed his jacket and loosened his tie, and he looked exhausted. I had them prepare a room for you, he said, without turning around. Upstairs, second door on the left. A room? Norah tried to understand. Not our room? There's no our anything. Caleb downed the whiskey in one swallow. You've got your space. I've got mine. That's how this works. I don't understand. What's not to understand? He finally looked at her, and his expression was carefully blank. We're married on paper. That's it. You needed a way out of your family's mess, and I needed to save face in front of the territory. Transaction complete. So what am I supposed to do? Whatever you want. Run the house, I guess. Isn't that what wives do? He poured another glass. I'll be working the ranch most days. You probably won't see me much. Norah stared at him. You're angry. Very perceptive. I didn't ask for this either. No, Caleb agreed. But you're here anyway. We both are. Might as well make the best of it. The best of it, Norah repeated, living as strangers under the same roof. You have a better idea? She didn't. Of course she didn't. What had she expected? Romance? Affection? She'd been the replacement bride, the backup plan, the girl nobody wanted. Why would he treat her as anything else? The room upstairs, she said quietly. Is that the one that was prepared for Vivian? Caleb's expression flickered, something like guilt, quickly suppressed. Does it matter? I suppose not. She turned to leave. Norah. She stopped. I'm sorry, Caleb said. For what it's worth. This wasn't fair to you. Life isn't fair. She didn't look back. I learned that a long time ago. She climbed the stairs alone. The room was exactly as she'd feared. Beautiful, carefully prepared, and completely wrong for her. White roses filled a crystal vase on the dresser, cream-colored ribbons decorated the bedposts, candles sat unlit on the nightstand. The whole space felt designed for someone else, someone beautiful, someone wanted, someone who wasn't Norah. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel it. The humiliation, the rejection, the absolute certainty that she would spend the rest of her life living in the shadow of the sister who'd escaped. She didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that tears didn't change anything. Instead, she unpacked the small bag her mother had sent over. A few dresses, a hairbrush, a book of poetry she'd owned since childhood. She hung her clothes in the wardrobe that still smelled faintly of Vivian's perfume. She placed her book on the nightstand beside the candles meant for someone else, and she tried to imagine what came next. Days passed in uncomfortable silence. Caleb left before dawn and returned after dark, coming home exhausted and speaking only in necessary sentences. Good morning. Dinner's ready. I'll be working late. They moved around each other like ghosts, occupying the same space but never really connecting. Norah tried to make herself useful. She explored the house, learning its rhythms, meeting the small staff, a housekeeper named Martha, a cook named Sarah, a handful of ranch hands who tipped their hats politely but avoided real conversation. Everyone treated her with careful courtesy, but she could feel their uncertainty. Nobody quite knew what to do with the unexpected bride. The house itself was bigger than anywhere Norah had ever lived. 3 stories of well-built rooms, expensive furniture, and empty spaces that echoed with absence. It should have felt grand. Instead, it felt lonely. She found the ranch office by accident on her 3rd day there. It sat at the back of the house, overlooking the corrals. The door was open, and curiosity drew her inside. Papers covered the desk in chaotic piles. Invoices, receipts, contracts, cattle tallies. A ledger lay open, numbers scrawled in hasty columns. Norah had always been good with numbers. Her father had taught her basic accounting when she was young, before he decided education was wasted on daughters who would just get married anyway. But she'd kept studying on her own, working through mathematics books she borrowed from the town library, practicing in the margins of old newspapers. She picked up the ledger and started reading. Within 10 minutes, she'd found 3 errors. Within an hour, she'd discovered that the ranch was paying almost double the market rate for feed. By the time Caleb came home that night, she'd reorganized half the desk and identified at least 4 suppliers who were overcharging systematically. What are you doing? She jumped. Caleb stood in the doorway, covered in dust, looking at her like she'd invaded somewhere private. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just looking, and I noticed. She gestured helplessly at the papers. Your bookkeeping is a mess. I know it's a mess. I don't have time to. He stopped. What do you mean you noticed? These numbers, half of them don't add up, and you're being overcharged for almost everything, feed, equipment, even basic supplies. I think some of your suppliers are taking advantage. Caleb moved closer, frowning. Show me. She walked him through it, pointing out discrepancies, explaining the patterns she'd found. He listened in silence, and she couldn't tell if he was angry or impressed or both. How did you learn to do this? He finally asked. Books? Practice? Norah shrugged. I had a lot of time on my hands before. Before you got married to a stranger? Before that, yes. Something shifted in his expression. Can you fix it? The bookkeeping? Probably. The suppliers will take more work, but if you let me renegotiate some of these contracts, do it, he said it immediately. Fix whatever you can. I'll back you up. It was the longest conversation they'd had since the wedding. Norah threw herself into the work. She spent hours at the desk, reorganizing accounts, tracking expenses, identifying waste. She wrote letters to suppliers, renegotiating prices with a firmness that surprised her. When one cattle buyer tried to dismiss her because she was a woman, she showed up at his office with 5 years of purchase records and proof he'd been systematically underweighing shipments. He renegotiated. Word spread fast. Within 2 weeks, other suppliers started treating her with wary respect. Within a month, she'd saved the ranch almost $3,000. The house staff noticed. Martha started asking her opinion on household expenses. Sarah consulted her about supply orders. The ranch hands stopped avoiding her and started tipping their hats with something that looked like actual acknowledgement. And Caleb changed. Not dramatically, not obviously. But Norah noticed. He started coming home earlier, started eating dinner with her instead of disappearing to his room, started asking her opinion on ranch decisions, not because he had to, but because he seemed to genuinely value what she thought. Their conversations grew longer, less awkward. One night, 3 weeks after the wedding, he actually smiled at something she said. It was a small thing, barely noticeable. But Norah felt it like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maybe, she thought, this wouldn't be completely unbearable after all. She was wrong. The morning Norah discovered just how deeply the ranch's problems ran, she'd been married exactly 4 weeks. She'd woken early, as she always did now, and made her way downstairs while the house still slept in blue-gray dawn light. The office had become her refuge, the one place where she felt useful instead of tolerated. She'd been working through the supply contracts when she found the letter stuffed behind a stack of old invoices. It was from the Territorial Land Office, a notice of unpaid taxes dating back 3 years. Her stomach dropped as she read the amount. $12,000, plus penalties. If unpaid by the end of summer, the territory could seize a portion of the ranch to settle the debt. "You're up early." Norah jumped, nearly dropping the letter. Caleb stood in the doorway, hair still damp from washing, shirt half-buttoned. She'd grown used to seeing him tired and dust-covered. This version, clean, almost relaxed, still caught her off guard. "I found something," she said, "in the files." His expression shifted immediately. "What kind of something?" She handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his jaw clench, watched his hands tighten on the paper until it crumpled at the edges. $12,000, he said quietly, plus penalties. "Caleb, this is dated from March. Why didn't, because I didn't know it existed." He looked up, and she saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Fear. "My father handled the territory taxes, said he had an arrangement with the land office, that it was taken care of. I never questioned it." "When was the last time you spoke to him about it?" "Before the wedding." Caleb's voice went flat. "Before he decided I'd humiliated him by marrying the wrong woman." The silence that followed felt heavy. "He wouldn't," Norah said, though even she didn't believe it. "He wouldn't sabotage his own son's ranch just because... You don't know my father." Caleb moved to the window, staring out at land that suddenly felt less secure. "He doesn't forgive, ever. When I went against him at that church, I became just another business problem to solve. By letting the territory seize your land, by teaching me a lesson I'll never forget." He laughed bitterly. "Worked, didn't it?" Norah looked at the letter again, her mind already calculating. 12,000 plus penalties meant close to 15,000 total. The ranch's accounts held maybe 4,000 in reserves. The upcoming cattle sale might bring in another 3 if prices held. That still left them 8,000 short with 4 months until the deadline. "We need to talk to the land office," she said. "See if they'll negotiate a payment plan." "They won't. Territory law is clear. Pay in full or lose the land." "Then we find the money somewhere else." "Where?" Caleb turned to face her. "I've already mortgaged everything I can. The bank won't extend more credit, not with my father spreading word that I'm unreliable. And before you suggest it, I'm not crawling back to him and begging." "I wasn't going to suggest that." "Then what?" Norah stared at the numbers, thinking. The ranch ran efficiently now. She'd cut enough waste to stabilize their monthly expenses. But saving $8,000 in 4 months would require something more than just careful bookkeeping. The water rights, she said suddenly. What about them? You control the creek that runs through the Peterson property. They've been asking to purchase access for years, haven't they? Caleb nodded slowly. Peterson offered $5,000 last spring. I turned him down because my father said the water was worth more as leverage. Sell it to him now. $5,000 gets us closer. That still leaves $3,000 short. The timber rights on the north section. Nobody's logged that forest in 20 years. If we contract with the mill in Silver Creek, that's my father's mill. Then we go to the mill in Copper Ridge. It's farther, but they pay fair rates. Norah was calculating as she spoke. Dense timber, maybe 300 acres worth harvesting. Conservative estimate, that's another $4,000 if we negotiate properly. Caleb stared at her. You've been thinking about this. I've been looking at every asset this ranch has. That's my job, isn't it? Your job is to run the house. My job, Norah said firmly, is to make sure we don't lose it. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite gratitude, not quite respect. Something newer, more complicated. All right, he said, set up the meetings. We'll see what we can get. The Peterson negotiation happened 3 days later. James Peterson was a weathered man in his 60s who'd been ranching the adjacent property since before Norah was born. He arrived at noon, riding a horse that had seen better years, and shook Caleb's hand with the careful neutrality of someone who'd heard all the wedding gossip but was too polite to mention it. Caleb, Mrs. Mercer. He nodded at Norah, and she appreciated that he used her married name without hesitation. Appreciate you seeing me. They sat in the front room and Norah poured coffee while the men exchanged pleasantries about weather and cattle prices. Finally, Caleb got to the point. You made an offer on the creek access last year. Still interested? Peterson's eyebrows rose. Your father told me that water wasn't for sale at any price. My father doesn't make decisions for this ranch anymore. I heard something about that. Peterson took a careful sip of coffee. Also heard you might be in a tight spot financially. That true? Norah watched Caleb's jaw tighten. Admitting weakness to a neighboring rancher was dangerous. Word would spread, and every supplier in the territory would start squeezing them. We're solvent, she said before Caleb could respond. But we're restructuring some assets. The water access is no longer strategic for our operation, so we're open to selling it at the right price. Peterson looked at her with new interest. What's the right price? $7,000. Caleb's head snapped toward her, but she kept her eyes on Peterson. That's $2,000 more than I offered before, Peterson said. Water rights have appreciated, and your herd has grown since last spring. You're running what, 300 head now? 400? Without reliable creek access, you're dependent on wells that run dry every August. How many cattle did you lose to dehydration last summer? Peterson's expression went carefully neutral. That's a personal question, Mrs. Mercer. It's a practical question. You need this water. We both know it. $7,000 is fair for what you're getting. $6,000 is fair. $7,000 is robbery. $6,000 and you maintain the fence line between our properties for the next 5 years. Peterson considered this. The fence maintenance was a constant expense, and the boundary between their ranches ran for almost 2 miles. $6,500 and I maintained the fence for 3 years. Done. Norah extended her hand before Caleb could interfere. Peterson shook it, looking slightly bemused. You drive a hard bargain, ma'am. I protect my interests, Mr. Peterson. Nothing personal. After Peterson left, Caleb stared at her. Where did you learn to negotiate like that? I didn't. I just thought about what he needed and what we could afford to give up. Norah poured herself more coffee to hide the fact that her hands were shaking. Did I overstep? You got us an extra $1,000 and dumped fence maintenance costs on someone else. If that's overstepping, do it more often. The timber negotiation was harder. The Copper Ridge Mill sent their procurement manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Morris, who'd been in the lumber business longer than Norah had been alive. She walked the North Forest section with them, examining trees, estimating board feet, taking notes in a leather journal. Dense growth, she admitted. Good quality pine, but it's remote. Transportation costs will eat into our margins. Build a temporary spur road, Norah suggested. We'll provide the labor and materials at cost. You get easier access. We get better rates on the timber. Who's going to build this road? Ranch hands during the slow season. We've got the manpower sitting idle half the year anyway. Catherine made a note. How much timber are we talking? 300 acres. Selective harvest, not clear cut. We want the forest to regenerate. Selective harvest costs more in labor, but it maintains the land value. Clear cutting turns 300 acres into wasteland. Selective harvest means we can log again in 20 years. Norah met the woman's eyes. I assume you'd like repeat business? Catherine smiled slightly. You assume correctly. All right, Mrs. Mercer, here's my offer. $3,000 for the timber, and we split the road construction costs. You provide labor, we provide equipment and expertise. $4,000, and you cover the full road costs. We provide labor and access. $3,500, we cover road costs. You provide labor and access plus grazing rights on the logged sections for our workhorses during the harvest. Norah glanced at Caleb, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Agreed. They shook hands. On the ride back to the ranch house, Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, you just negotiated $10,000 in 2 meetings. $10,500 actually. The grazing rights are worth about $500 if we're being precise. Where did you learn to do this? I told you, I didn't learn it anywhere. She stopped, trying to find the right words. I spent my whole life watching people negotiate around me. My father selling cattle, my mother haggling with shopkeepers, Vivian manipulating everyone she met into giving her what she wanted. I paid attention. Vivian couldn't negotiate her way out of a paper bag. No, but she could make people want to give her things. That's a different skill. Norah looked out at the prairie rolling past. I learned to read what people need. Once you know that, the rest is just arithmetic. Caleb was silent for another mile. Then, thank you. For what? For caring about this ranch when you have no reason to. I live here, Norah said simply. That's reason enough. The money from Peterson arrived within a week. The timber contract was signed by the end of the month. By mid-June, they had enough to pay the territory taxes with a small amount left over. Norah should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt the distance between herself and Caleb starting to close in ways that terrified her. It started small. He began asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with money: where to rotate the cattle, whether to hire an additional ranch hand, what to plant in the kitchen garden. He started eating breakfast with her instead of grabbing coffee and disappearing before dawn. He fixed the loose board on the porch steps without being asked, because he'd heard her mention it to Martha. One evening, she found him in the office going through the books she'd reorganized. Looking for something? She asked. Just trying to understand how you did this. He gestured at the ledgers. Everything's so clear now, I can actually see where the money's going. That's the point of bookkeeping. I never had time to do it properly before. Always seemed like there were more important things. He looked up at her. I was wrong about that. Most people think bookkeeping is boring. It's not boring when it saves your ranch. Norah moved to the desk, looking at the neat columns she'd created. I like the order of it. Numbers don't lie. They don't have hidden motives or secret agendas. They just are what they are. Unlike people. Unlike people, she agreed. Caleb closed the ledger. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you agree to marry me, at the church, I mean? You could have refused. The question caught her off guard. I don't know if I could have, actually. My father had already offered. You'd already accepted. Everyone was watching. That's not the same as having no choice. Isn't it? Norah sat in the chair across from him. What would have happened if I'd refused? My family's reputation was already destroyed. Refusing would have made it worse. And for what? To prove a point? To preserve my pride? She laughed without humor. I didn't have any pride left to preserve. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. I could have said no. Could have walked out of that church and let the whole thing collapse. Why didn't you? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I was angry. At Vivian, at my father, at the entire situation. And when your father offered you up like that, when everyone laughed, I thought, fine. If everyone expects me to be humiliated, I'll do the one thing nobody expects. I'll marry her anyway. So it was spite. It was spite, he admitted. I'm not proud of it. At least you're honest. Does that make it better or worse? Norah considered this. Better, I think. I'd rather know the truth than live with a comfortable lie. The truth is that I made a decision out of anger that trapped both of us. The truth is that we're both making the best of it." She met his eyes. "And it could be worse. We could hate each other. Do we not?" "I don't hate you," Norah said carefully. "Do you hate me?" "No." He said it immediately. "No, I don't hate you at all." The silence that followed felt different than the silences before, less empty, more full of things neither of them knew how to say. "I should let you sleep," Caleb finally said, standing. "It's late." "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Norah." He paused at the door, looking back at her. For a moment, she thought he might say something else. Instead, he just nodded and left. Norah sat alone in the office, listening to his footsteps fade up the stairs, and wondered what she was starting to feel. The house began to change. Norah had been so focused on the ranch's finances that she'd barely noticed how neglected the domestic spaces had become. But one morning, Martha pulled her aside with an apologetic expression. "Mrs. Mercer, I hate to bother you, but we've got a situation with the roof over the back bedrooms. There's water damage from the spring storms, and if we don't fix it soon, we're going to have mold problems." Norah followed her upstairs to see. Sure enough, brown stains spread across the ceiling in two of the unused guest rooms. The walls felt damp to the touch, and a faint musty smell hung in the air. "How long has this been going on?" Martha looked uncomfortable. "Since before you arrived, ma'am. I mentioned it to Mr. Mercer's father last winter, but he said it wasn't a priority. Then, with the wedding chaos and everything after, it fell through the cracks." "I understand." Norah examined the damage. "We'll need a roofer, someone reliable." "There's Tom Barrett in town. Does good work, fair prices. Send for him. And Martha, from now on, if something needs attention in the house, come to me directly. Don't wait for it to become a crisis." "Yes, ma'am." The roof repair led to discovering rotted boards in the back porch, which led to finding a wasp nest in the attic, which led to realizing that half the windows had frames so warped they wouldn't close properly. The house, Norah realized, had been slowly falling apart while the previous occupants focused on everything else. She threw herself into fixing it. She hired craftsmen to repair the damage. She reorganized the storage rooms, discarding junk that had accumulated for years. She worked with Martha and Sarah to establish proper cleaning schedules, maintenance routines, inventory systems. The house had been run haphazardly for so long that everyone seemed relieved to have actual structure. Caleb noticed. "The back porch looks different," he said one evening. "I had the rotted boards replaced and the railing reinforced. It was a safety hazard." "I didn't even realize it was rotted." "Most people don't notice these things until someone falls through." Norah wiped dirt from her hands. She'd spent the afternoon helping clear out the storage shed. "The house is in better shape than I thought, actually. It just needed attention." "Like the books." "Like the books," she agreed. He looked around the kitchen, which Sarah had reorganized based on Norah's suggestions. Everything had a place now. The space felt cleaner, more functional. "It feels different in here," Caleb said. "More like a home, less like a hotel." "Is that good or bad?" "Good. Definitely good." He hesitated. "Thank you for caring about it." "It's my home too," Norah said. "I want it to feel like one." The words hung between them, and she realized it was the first time she'd called the ranch home out loud. The first time she'd claimed it as hers instead of just existing in it. Caleb smiled. Actually smiled, not the slight upward tick of his mouth she'd seen before, but a real smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Summer deepened, and the distance between them continued to shrink in small, almost imperceptible increments. They started taking meals together regularly, started sharing details about their days over dinner, started sitting on the repaired porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie while they talked about nothing important, weather, neighbors, the new foal in the stables. Norah caught herself looking forward to those conversations, looking forward to seeing him walk through the door at the end of the day, dust-covered and exhausted, but always willing to sit and talk for a while before disappearing to clean up. She also caught herself noticing things she'd trained herself to ignore before. The way his hair curled slightly when it needed cutting, the scar on his forearm from a barbed wire accident years ago, the careful way he handled the ranch horses, gentle despite his size. She was noticing him as a man instead of just the stranger she'd married. It scared her. One night in late July, they sat on the porch watching heat lightning flicker on the horizon. The air felt thick and heavy, promising rain that might not come. Cicadas screamed in the darkness. "I'm going into town tomorrow," Caleb said. "Supply run." "Want to come?" Norah looked at him, surprised. "You've never asked me to come before. You've never seemed like you wanted to." "I didn't think I was invited." "You're always invited," Caleb said. "You're my wife." The words hit differently than they had before. Less like a legal fact, more like something real. "All right," Norah said. "I'll come." The next morning, they rode into Black Ridge together in the wagon. It was Norah's first time back in town since the wedding, and she felt her stomach clench with anxiety as the buildings came into view. Everyone would remember. Everyone would know. "You okay?" Caleb asked, noticing her tension. "Just nervous." "About what people will say?" "About what they're already saying." Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop before they reached the main street. He turned to face her. "Listen to me. Most of these people aren't worth your concern. They'll gossip either way, whether you hide at the ranch or walk through town with your head up. So you might as well walk with your head up. Easy for you to say. You're not the girl who replaced her own sister." "No, I'm the fool who married her." He said it without bitterness. "We're both part of this mess, Norah. We might as well face it together." She looked at him, searching his face for mockery or resentment. She found neither. "Together," she repeated. "Together." They drove into town. The gossip was there, of course. Norah felt the stares as they walked down the main street, heard the whispers that cut off when she passed, saw the pitying looks from the women and the speculative glances from the men. But Caleb stayed beside her. When they entered the mercantile, he introduced her as "my wife, Mrs. Mercer," with no hesitation or shame. When they passed the hotel restaurant, he suggested they have lunch there instead of eating on the wagon ride home. When Mrs. Fairfax, the banker's wife, offered condolences that barely masked curiosity, Caleb cut her off with a polite but firm, "We're very happy, thank you." By the time they left town, Norah felt something unfamiliar. Protected, not hidden, not defended like property. Protected, like someone actually cared what happened to her. On the ride home, she finally asked the question that had been nagging at her for weeks. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Caleb glanced at her. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one. At the wedding, you made it clear this was just a transaction. Now you're—" She struggled for the right words. "You're different, acting different. I don't understand why." He was quiet for a long time, guiding the horses through the rutted road. Finally, "You want the truth?" "Always. At the wedding, I thought I was stuck with a burden. Someone I'd have to tolerate for the rest of my life because I'd made a stupid decision in anger." He kept his eyes on the road. "But you're not a burden, Norah. You've saved this ranch more times than I can count. You've made the house actually livable. You work harder than half my ranch hands and never complain about any of it. That's just— and more than that," he continued, "you're good company. I like talking to you. I like having you around. Somewhere along the way, this stopped feeling like a trap and started feeling like—" He stopped. "Like what?" "Like, maybe I didn't make such a stupid decision after all." Nora's heart did something complicated in her chest. "That's the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me," she said quietly. "Then people have been saying the wrong things to you your whole life." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence anymore. It was the kind of quiet that felt full instead of empty. That night, Norah couldn't sleep. She lay in the bedroom that no longer felt like Vivian's cast-off, staring at the ceiling, replaying Caleb's words over and over, trying to understand what was happening between them, trying to figure out what she felt. Attraction? Yes, if she was honest. She'd been ignoring it for weeks, but it was there. The awareness of him as more than just the man she'd married. The way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her. The way she found excuses to be near him. But it was more than attraction. She respected him, trusted him, enjoyed his company, felt safe around him in a way she'd never felt safe around anyone. Was that love? She didn't know. She'd never been in love before, had nothing to compare it to. All she knew was that the thought of losing this, losing him, made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with pride or security or any practical concern. Downstairs, she heard footsteps. Caleb, probably getting water from the kitchen. She listened to him move through the house, then heard his footsteps on the stairs. They paused outside her door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then quietly, "Norah? You awake?" She sat up. "Yes." "Can I come in?" Her heart hammered. "Yes." The door opened. Caleb stood in the hallway in an undershirt and trousers, hair disheveled from sleep. He looked uncertain in a way she'd never seen him look before. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Neither could I. I keep thinking about what I said earlier, about you being good company and this not feeling like a trap." He stepped into the room but stayed near the door. "That came out wrong, made it sound like I was just tolerating you less, when what I meant was—" He stopped, frustrated. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At saying what I mean when it matters." Norah's throat felt tight. "Then just say it plainly. No poetry, no clever phrases, just the truth." Caleb met her eyes. "The truth is that I care about you, more than I should probably, given how this started. The truth is that I look forward to seeing you every day, that I worry about you when you work too hard, that I get angry when people disrespect you because they don't see what I see." He took a breath. "The truth is that this stopped being a marriage of convenience weeks ago, at least for me, and I needed you to know that." The room felt too small and too large at the same time. "Why now?" Norah asked. "Why tell me this tonight?" "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't feel it. Because life's too short and too hard to waste time on pretending." He moved closer. "And because I needed to know if I'm completely alone in this, or if maybe you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling." Norah stood on shaking legs. Her heart felt like it might break through her ribs. "You're not alone," she whispered. The distance between them disappeared. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe both of them. But suddenly Caleb's hands were in her hair, and her palms were pressed against his chest, and they were kissing like people who'd been holding back too long. It wasn't gentle, wasn't sweet. It was months of tension and loneliness and wanting finally breaking free. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead to hers. "Tell me to leave," he said roughly. "Tell me to go back to my room, and I will. But tell me now, because if I stay any longer—" "Stay," Norah said. "Norah, stay." He kissed her again, softer this time, and she felt something in her chest crack open. Something she'd kept locked away her entire life because nobody had ever made her feel like it was safe to let it out. That night, the marriage that began as a transaction became something real. And in the bedroom that once held decorations meant for someone else, Norah finally understood what it felt like to be chosen. Not as a replacement, not as a consolation prize, as herself. The weeks that followed felt like living in a dream Norah kept expecting to end. She woke each morning to find Caleb still beside her, solid and real, in the early light filtering through the curtains. They'd stopped pretending to maintain separate rooms, stopped pretending this was anything other than what it had become, a real marriage, growing stronger each day in ways that surprised them both. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The cattle were healthy, the accounts balanced, the house running smoothly. They worked together with an ease that felt natural now, finishing each other's sentences, anticipating needs before they were spoken. At night, they talked for hours in the darkness, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never shown anyone else. Caleb told her about growing up under his father's iron control, about the constant pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness. Norah told him about being invisible her entire childhood, about watching Vivian absorb all the attention while she learned to disappear. "I used to think being invisible was safer," she admitted one night, her head resting on his chest. "Nobody could hurt you if they didn't see you." "But nobody could love you either," Caleb said quietly. "No, nobody could." He pulled her closer. "I see you, every part of you, and I'm not going anywhere." She wanted to believe him, chose to believe him, even though a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that nothing this good ever lasted. August arrived with blistering heat and the kind of blue skies that seemed to stretch forever. Norah was in the office working through the quarterly accounts when Martha appeared in the doorway, expression strange. "Mrs. Mercer, you have a visitor." Norah looked up. "Who is it?" "She says she's your sister." The pen slipped from Norah's fingers. Vivian stood in the front parlor like she'd never left, like the past 4 months hadn't happened at all. She wore an expensive green traveling dress with lace trim, her blonde hair perfectly arranged under a fashionable hat. She looked radiant, confident, completely unbothered by the chaos she'd caused. "Norah!" Vivian's smile was brilliant. "Look at you, mistress of this enormous house. Who would have thought?" Norah couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Seeing Vivian here, in the home Norah had built, felt like having the ground collapse beneath her feet. "What are you doing here?" "Is that any way to greet your sister?" Vivian laughed, that musical sound that had always made people turn and smile. "I came to visit, of course, to see how you're managing, to meet your husband properly." She glanced around the parlor with barely concealed appraisal. "This is quite a step up from Papa's house, isn't it?" "Vivian, oh, don't look so horrified. I'm not here to cause trouble." Vivian settled onto the sofa like she owned it. "I wanted to see you. We're still sisters, aren't we? Despite everything? Despite you running away and leaving me to clean up your mess? Now that's not entirely fair. I left you an opportunity." Vivian's eyes sparkled with mischief. "And you took it, didn't you? Married Caleb Mercer. Secured yourself quite a comfortable future. Really, Norah, you should be thanking me." The words hit like a slap. "Get out." "Don't be dramatic. I just got here." Vivian examined her gloves with studied casualty. "Besides, I brought someone I want you to meet." "Darling," she called toward the front door. "Come in." A man entered the parlor. Tall, handsome in a polished way, wearing clothes that cost more than most families earned in a year. He had the easy confidence of someone who'd never struggled for anything in his life. "This is Richard Thornton," Vivian announced proudly. "My husband." Norah stared. "You got married?" 3 weeks ago in San Francisco. Isn't it wonderful?" Vivian gazed at Richard adoringly. "He's from Boston originally. His family owns shipping interests, and he's been traveling west to expand their business. We met the very night I left Black Ridge. Can you believe the timing? It was fate." "It was convenient," Norah said flatly. Richard extended his hand, apparently oblivious to the tension. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Mercer. Vivian's told me so much about you." "I'm sure she has." Norah ignored his hand. "What are you really doing here, Vivian?" "I told you. We're visiting. Richard wanted to see the frontier, and I thought, why not stop by and see my dear sister? It's been months. I've missed you." "You've never missed me a day in your life." Vivian's smile flickered. "That's cruel, Norah." "It's true." The front door opened again, and Caleb walked in, dusty from working the far pasture. He stopped when he saw the visitors, his expression going carefully blank. "Caleb!" Vivian stood, her smile returning full force. "My goodness, look at you. Still as handsome as ever." "Vivian," Caleb's voice was cold. "What are you doing in my house?" "Our house, surely. Norah's my sister. I'm always welcome here." "No, you're not." "Caleb, don't be rude. We're family now, all of us." Vivian gestured at Richard. "This is my husband, Richard Thornton. Richard, this is Caleb Mercer, the man I was supposed to marry before I met you." Richard looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Ah, I see." "Vivian, you need to leave," Norah said. "We just arrived. We've traveled for days to get here. Surely you can offer us some hospitality. We won't stay long, just a few days while Richard conducts some business in the area." Caleb looked at Norah, and she saw the question in his eyes. She wanted to say no, wanted to throw Vivian out and never see her again. But refusing outright would cause a scene, would give Vivian ammunition to spread more gossip. 3 days, Norah said tightly. "Then you leave." "Wonderful," Vivian clapped her hands. "Martha, dear, could you show us to a guest room? We'll need our bags brought up." Martha looked at Norah for confirmation. Norah nodded stiffly, and the housekeeper led Vivian and Richard upstairs. As soon as they were gone, Caleb moved to Norah's side. "Are you all right?" "No." Norah's hands were shaking. "No, I'm not all right. Why is she here? What does she want?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll handle it together." "She married someone else. She ran off and married someone else, and now she's here acting like nothing happened. She's trying to get under your skin. Don't let her." But it was too late. Vivian was already there, burrowing into Norah's newfound happiness like poison. Dinner that night was excruciating. Vivian dominated the conversation, telling elaborate stories about San Francisco, about Richard's family, about the sophisticated life they were building together. She made everything sound glamorous, exciting, infinitely superior to frontier ranch life. Of course, Boston is where we'll settle eventually, she said, cutting her roast with delicate precision. Richard's family has a house on Beacon Hill. 4 stories, overlooks the common. You can't imagine how beautiful it is. Sounds crowded, Caleb said. Civilized, Vivian corrected. Not that there's anything wrong with this. She gestured vaguely at the dining room. Rustic lifestyle. It suits some people perfectly. Vivian, Richard said quietly, perhaps we should… I'm just being honest, darling. Norah understands. She always understood that she was better suited for simple things. Didn't you, sister? Norah gripped her fork hard enough to hurt. I understand that you're being deliberately insulting in my own home. Our home, Vivian said sweetly. Well, yours and Caleb's. I suppose I should say congratulations, shouldn't I? On your marriage. It all worked out so conveniently. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing at all. Just that you landed quite well, all things considered. From nobody's daughter to mistress of one of the largest ranches in the territory. That's quite an accomplishment. Caleb set down his glass with a hard click. Vivian, if you've come here just to, I came to visit my sister. Is that so wrong? Vivian's eyes were wide, innocent. We used to be close, Norah and I. Before all this happened, I miss that. We were never close, Norah said. You tolerated me when you needed someone to blame for your mistakes. That's not true. It's completely true, and we both know it. Vivian's mask slipped for just a moment, showing something ugly underneath. Then she smiled again, bright and brittle. Well, marriage has certainly made you bold. I barely recognize you. Good. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. Richard attempted small talk about cattle prices and weather patterns, clearly trying to ease the tension. It didn't work. The air felt thick with unspoken hostility. After dinner, Caleb pulled Norah aside in the hallway. 2 more days, he said quietly. Then she's gone, and we never have to see her again. She's going to ruin everything. I can feel it. She can't ruin anything unless we let her. She's jealous, Norah. Can't you see that? Jealous? Of what? She's the one who got everything she wanted. Did she? Caleb glanced toward the parlor where Vivian's laughter rang out. She ran away from a secure future to chase excitement, and now she's married to a man she barely knows. Meanwhile, you're here, building something real, something that lasts. Of course she's jealous. Norah wanted to believe that. But Vivian had always had a way of twisting reality, of making Norah doubt her own perceptions. The next day was worse. Vivian spent the morning exploring the house, commenting on everything with barely veiled criticism disguised as compliments. Oh, what a quaint little office. The furniture is so practical. You've certainly made the best of what you have. She found the bedroom Norah shared with Caleb and stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. This was supposed to be my room, she said softly. Norah felt ice in her veins. It's my room now. I know. I can see you've made changes, different curtains, different quilts. Vivian touched the doorframe, but underneath it's still the same room, the same bed, the same view of the same empty prairie. She turned to look at Norah. Do you ever think about that? That you're living the life I rejected? Every day, Norah said honestly. And every day, I'm grateful you were foolish enough to leave it behind. Vivian's eyes narrowed. You've gotten mean, little sister. I've gotten honest. There's a difference. Is there? Vivian moved closer, voice dropping. Tell me something, Norah. When Caleb touches you, does he ever call you by my name? Does he ever close his eyes and imagine it's me instead? The words landed like a physical blow. Get out of my room. I'm just asking an honest question. After all, he was supposed to marry me. You're just… What did Papa call you? The spare daughter, the consolation prize. Get out. Does he know? Vivian pressed. Does he know that every time he looks at you, part of him is comparing you to me? Measuring you against what he could have had? Vivian! Richard appeared in the hallway. What are you doing? Having a conversation with my sister. Is that not allowed? You're being unkind. Richard looked genuinely distressed. Please, let's go downstairs. Vivian smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. Of course, darling, whatever you say. She brushed past Norah. We'll talk later, sister. Norah stood alone in the bedroom, Vivian's words echoing in her mind. You're living the life I rejected. You're just the consolation prize. Does he ever imagine it's me instead? She sank onto the bed, hands shaking. The doubts she'd buried, the fears she'd tried to ignore, came roaring back with vicious clarity. Caleb had been prepared to marry Vivian, had stood at that altar expecting Vivian, had probably spent weeks imagining a future with Vivian, and then Norah had appeared instead. Second choice. Replacement. The sister nobody wanted. Norah? She looked up. Caleb stood in the doorway, concerned. Martha said Vivian was bothering you. What did she say? Nothing. It doesn't matter. It clearly does matter. You're shaking. I'm fine. Norah, I said I'm fine. The words came out sharper than she intended. Just leave me alone. Caleb looked stung. All right, if that's what you want. He started to leave, then stopped. Whatever she said to you, it's poison. You know that, right? Do I? Yes, because you know me. You know us. Don't let her take that away. He left before she could respond. Norah sat in the silence, wondering if Vivian had already taken more than either of them realized. That evening, Vivian struck again. They were all in the front parlor, Norah and Caleb on one sofa, Vivian and Richard on the other. The conversation had been carefully neutral, discussing Richard's business prospects, until Vivian steered it somewhere dangerous. You know, Caleb, I never properly apologized for leaving you at the altar. That was terribly rude of me. Caleb's expression went carefully blank. Water under the bridge. Still, I feel badly about it. You deserve better than a runaway bride. Vivian glanced at Norah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Though it seems to have worked out for everyone. You got married anyway. I found my true love. And Norah? Well, Norah got a husband she never could have caught on her own. Vivian, Richard warned. What? I'm complimenting her. Norah's very fortunate. Aren't you, sister? I'm aware of my circumstances, Norah said tightly. Are you? Because sometimes I worry you might forget. Vivian leaned forward, all artificial concern. This marriage, it happened so quickly, so transactionally. You replaced me before the flowers even wilted. Doesn't that ever bother you? No. Really, it would bother me. Knowing I was only there because someone else ran away. Knowing that if I'd stayed, you'd still be back at Papa's house, unmarried and unwanted. That's enough, Caleb said sharply. I'm just being honest. Honesty is important in a marriage, don't you think? Vivian's eyes glittered. You only married her because I left. That's not romantic. That's not fate. That's just convenient. The words hung in the air like smoke. Norah felt something crack inside her chest because, as much as she wanted to deny it, as much as she'd been trying to believe otherwise, Vivian was right. Caleb had married her because Vivian ran away. That was the truth. The undeniable, painful truth. Everything they'd built since then, the closeness, the intimacy, the feelings growing between them, all of it rested on a foundation of accident and desperation. Norah, Caleb started, but she couldn't hear it. Couldn't sit there and listen to him try to explain away what they both knew was true. Excuse me, she said quietly, standing. I'm not feeling well. She walked out before anyone could stop her. She made it to the office before the tears came, pressed her hands against the desk and tried to breathe through the ache in her chest. Vivian was destroying her. Systematically, deliberately destroying the fragile happiness Norah had built. And the worst part was that she was doing it with the truth. Caleb found her there 20 minutes later. Norah, don't. You can't believe what she said. Why not? It's true. Norah didn't turn around. You married me because Vivian ran away. That's a fact. If she'd stayed, you'd be married to her right now, and I'd be exactly where I've always been. Nowhere. That's not... Don't lie to me, Caleb. Please, don't lie. She finally turned to face him. At the church, you told me yourself. You married me out of spite, out of anger, out of a desire to salvage something from the humiliation. You didn't choose me. You chose to not look weak. At the church, yes, but that's not... And everything since then? All of this? She gestured between them. How much of it is real and how much of it is just us making the best of a bad situation? How much is genuine feeling and how much is just convenience? You think what I feel for you is convenient? Caleb looked genuinely hurt. You think I could fake what's been happening between us? I think people are very good at convincing themselves of what they need to believe. I think you needed to believe this marriage could be bearable, so you found reasons to make it so. I was there. I was useful. I was better than being alone. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Nora's voice cracked. I've spent my entire life being second best to Vivian, the less pretty sister, the less charming sister, the daughter nobody cared about. And I actually let myself think that maybe with you that would finally change, that maybe I could be someone's first choice for once. You are my first choice. No, I'm your only choice. There's a difference. The words fell between them like stones. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. What do you want me to say? Yes, I married you because Vivian left. Yes, the circumstances were awful, but what we've built since then, what we have now, that's real. That's not convenience or desperation or making the best of things. I love you, Norah. The words should have filled her with joy. Instead, they felt like they were coming too late. Do you? She asked quietly. Or do you love what I've done for this ranch? The money I've saved, the order I've brought, the way I've made your life easier? That's not because I'm useful, Caleb. I know that. I've always known my value comes from what I can do, not who I am. Stop it. Stop putting words in my mouth and thoughts in my head. Caleb moved closer. Yes, you're useful. Yes, you've helped this ranch immensely. But that's not why I love you. I love you because you're strong when it matters. Because you're honest even when it hurts. Because you see me. The real me, not the Mercer heir or the ranch owner, just me. And you don't flinch away. Norah wanted to believe him, wanted it desperately. But Vivian's words kept echoing. You only married her because I left. I need some time, she said, alone, to think. Norah, please. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but this conversation isn't over. We're not over. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Norah sank into the desk chair and let herself cry. The next morning, everything came to a head. Norah woke early after a sleepless night and came downstairs to find Vivian alone in the kitchen, drinking coffee like she belonged there. Couldn't sleep? Vivian asked sweetly. What do you want, Vivian? Really? What are you doing here? I told you, visiting. You never do anything without a reason. So what is it? What do you gain from coming here and tearing apart my marriage? Vivian set down her coffee cup slowly. Your marriage? How presumptuous, like you actually earned it. I've worked for everything I have here. You stepped into something I left behind. There's a difference. Vivian's mask finally dropped completely. Do you know what it was like, Norah, growing up with you, my plain, boring, invisible little sister who everyone pitied because she'd never be as pretty or charming as me? I'm aware. But the thing is, you were always Papa's favorite, not me. You. Vivian's voice went sharp with old resentment. He tried to hide it, but I knew. Every time I made a mistake, he'd sigh and wish I was more like you. Responsible, steady, boring, sensible Norah who never caused problems. That's not true. It is true. And then I finally get something, finally get chosen for something important. And what do? You take it. You step into my wedding, wear my ring, sleep in my bed, and somehow convince everyone that you deserve it. You ran away. You abandoned. I escaped. Vivian stood. I escaped this suffocating place and these suffocating expectations. And you know what? I expected you to fail. I expected Caleb to hate you, the ranch to collapse, everything to fall apart. Instead, I come back and find you've somehow made it work. You've made people respect you, made Caleb care about you. You've taken the life I rejected and made it into something that actually looks happy. The truth hit Norah like cold water. Vivian wasn't here to visit. She was here to prove that Norah hadn't really won anything worth winning. And you can't stand it, Norah said quietly. Can you? That I might actually be happy in the life you threw away. You're not happy. You're pretending. Just like you're pretending Caleb actually wanted you instead of settling for you. At least I'm not pretending my husband loves me when he clearly married me for my family's money. Vivian's hand cracked across Norah's face. They both froze. How dare you, Vivian whispered. How dare I? Norah touched her stinging cheek. You've spent 2 days trying to destroy my marriage, and you're upset because I pointed out that Richard Thornton didn't marry you for your sparkling personality? You don't know anything about Richard and me. I know he looked uncomfortable every time you spoke yesterday. I know he tried to stop you from being cruel. I know that he seems like a decent man trapped with someone who will make him miserable. Norah met her sister's eyes. Sound familiar? Get out of my sight. This is my house. You get out. Girls? Richard appeared in the doorway, still in his dressing gown. What's going on? Your wife just struck me, Norah said flatly. Richard's face went pale. Vivian, she provoked me. I told the truth. Apparently that's unforgivable. We're leaving. Richard looked genuinely disturbed. Right now, Vivian, go pack our things. But we haven't now. For the first time, Vivian looked uncertain. She glanced between Richard and Norah, then fled upstairs without another word. Richard turned to Norah with an expression of deep apology. I'm sorry. I didn't know. She told me this was just a friendly visit. I didn't realize there was so much bad blood between you. She didn't mention abandoning me to clean up her mess. She said she'd left an arranged marriage she didn't want, that her family understood, that everyone had moved on. He rubbed his face tiredly. I'm beginning to realize my wife doesn't always tell me the truth. No, she doesn't. For what it's worth, I do care about her. It's not about money. I hope that's true, Norah said quietly. For your sake. Within the hour, Vivian and Richard were gone. Norah stood on the porch watching their carriage disappear down the road, feeling hollowed out and exhausted. Good riddance, Martha muttered, appearing beside her. She's still my sister. Blood doesn't make someone family, loyalty does. And that woman's never been loyal to anyone but herself. Norah couldn't argue with that. She found Caleb in the stables, working on a broken saddle he didn't need to fix. Busy work to keep his hands occupied while his mind churned. They're gone, she said. He looked up. Good. They stood in silence for a moment. I'm sorry, Norah finally said, for what I said last night. Some of it was unfair. Some of it was honest. Caleb set down the saddle. Norah, I can't change how this started. I can't go back and choose you first, before Vivian, before any of this happened. If I could, I would, but I can't. I know. What I can do is choose you now, every day, every moment. I can choose to be the kind of husband you deserve instead of the one you got stuck with. You've already been that husband for months now. Then why don't you believe it? The question hung between them, and Norah didn't have a good answer. Or rather, she had too many answers, all of them rooted in a lifetime of being invisible and unwanted. Because I'm terrified, she admitted. Because it's the first good thing that's ever happened to me, and I keep waiting for it to be taken away. And when Vivian showed up and said all those things, it felt like confirmation, like proof that I'd been fooling myself. Caleb crossed the space between them. You haven't been fooling yourself. I haven't been fooling myself. What we have is real. How do you know? Because I've never worked this hard for anything in my life. Ranching is brutal, but it's simple. You put in the work, you get results. Relationships aren't like that. They're messy and complicated and require constant effort. He cupped her face gently, and I'm willing to put in that effort, every single day, for you. Norah felt the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. I don't know how to trust this, she whispered. Then trust me. Trust that I'm not going anywhere. Trust that when I say I love you, I mean it. He brushed away her tears with his thumbs. And trust that if you need me to prove it every day for the rest of our lives, I will. She kissed him then, tasting salt and desperation and hope all mixed together. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. 3 days, she said. Vivian was here for 3 days, and she almost destroyed us. She didn't destroy us. She tested us. We bent, but we didn't break. This time. Every time, Caleb said firmly. No matter what comes, we face it together. That's what marriage means. Norah wanted to believe that, was choosing to believe it, even though doubt still whispered in the back of her mind. But before she could respond, they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. They emerged from the stable to see a rider coming up the road at a full gallop. As he got closer, Norah recognized him, one of the ranch hands from the Mercer family's main property, 20 miles north. Mr. Mercer! The rider pulled his horse to a halt, breathing hard. Your father sent me. He's coming here, tomorrow, with lawyers. Caleb went very still. Why? He's filing for annulment of your marriage. Says it's invalid due to fraud or coercion or some legal thing I didn't understand. Says he's bringing a judge from the territorial court to dissolve it officially. The words landed like a bomb. He can't do that, Norah said. He can try, Caleb said grimly, and with enough money and the right connections, he might succeed. The rider shifted uncomfortably. There's more. He's bringing Miss Caroline Ashford with him. Says she's your intended bride, the one you should have married in the first place. Norah felt the world tilt. Caroline Ashford, the daughter of the territorial governor, beautiful, educated, connected to every powerful family within 500 miles. The kind of woman Malcolm Mercer would actually approve of. The kind of woman who made Norah look like exactly what Vivian had called her, a consolation prize. Thank you for the warning, Caleb told the rider. Get yourself some food and water before you head back. As the rider led his horse toward the water trough, Caleb turned to Norah. She saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. He's going to try to take this away from us, she said quietly. He's going to try. What if he succeeds? Caleb pulled her close. Then we fight, with everything we have. But as they stood there holding each other, Norah couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. And this time, Vivian's poison words might turn out to be prophecy. They had exactly 18 hours to prepare. Norah spent the night going through every legal document related to their marriage, searching for any weakness Malcolm Mercer could exploit. Marriage certificate signed by a territorial judge. Witnesses present. Both parties of legal age and sound mind. Everything appeared legitimate on paper. Unless he argues I was coerced, Norah said, spreading documents across the office desk. That my father forced me into it. Caleb looked up from the ranch's property deeds he'd been examining. Were you? Does it matter what I say? Your father will claim I was, and my father won't contradict him if it means escaping blame. Then we need someone who was there. Someone who'll testify you had a choice. Who? Everyone in that church watched my father offer me up like livestock. They saw me hesitate. They heard the laughter. Norah's hands shook as she organized papers. Malcolm will paint me as a desperate girl who seized an opportunity, and you as an angry fool who made a rash decision. He'll argue the whole thing was invalid from the start. The marriage has been consummated. That makes it legally binding. He'll say we're lying, or that it doesn't matter if the initial contract was fraudulent. She looked at Caleb, fear plain on her face. He's been planning this for months, hasn't he? Since the wedding. He's just been waiting for the right moment. Probably. Caleb's jaw tightened. He doesn't forgive disloyalty, and marrying you instead of who he chose was the ultimate disloyalty in his eyes. They worked through the night, building their defense, anticipating arguments, but every scenario ended the same way. Malcolm Mercer had money, power, and connections. They had a marriage certificate and hope. It didn't feel like enough. Dawn broke cold and gray. Norah dressed carefully in her most conservative dress, pinned her hair back severely, tried to look like someone worthy of being a rancher's wife, instead of the replacement bride everyone knew she was. Martha found her in the bedroom, staring at her reflection. You look fine, Mrs. Mercer. I look terrified. You look strong. There's a difference. Martha adjusted Norah's collar. That man's coming here to try and take away what you've built. Don't let him see you scared. I am scared. Then be scared on the inside and furious on the outside. Works better that way. By mid-morning, the carriages arrived. Malcolm Mercer came first, riding in a polished coach pulled by 4 horses. Behind him, a second carriage carried 2 men in expensive suits, lawyers, obviously, and a woman Norah could only assume was Judge Hartwell from the territorial court. The third carriage held Caroline Ashford. Norah watched from the parlor window as the woman stepped down gracefully, accepting Malcolm's offered hand. She was everything Norah wasn't. Tall, elegant, wearing a dress that cost more than most families earned in a year. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style, and even from a distance Norah could see she was beautiful. She looks like a painting, Norah whispered. Caleb came to stand beside her. She looks like every other society woman my father's tried to force on me over the years. She looks like someone who belongs here. You belong here. He took her hand. Whatever happens today, remember that. Malcolm didn't knock. He walked into the house like he owned it, lawyers flanking him, the judge following at a more dignified pace. Caroline Ashford remained outside, apparently having enough grace not to intrude on what was clearly going to be an ugly confrontation. "Caleb," Malcolm's voice filled the front hall. "We need to talk, privately. Anything you have to say can be said in front of my wife. Your supposed wife. That's precisely what we're here to address." Malcolm's gaze swept over Norah with cold dismissal. "Miss Hale, you should—" "Mrs. Mercer," Norah corrected quietly. "My name is Mrs. Mercer." "Not for long," Malcolm turned to Caleb. "I'm giving you one chance to handle this quietly. Agree to the annulment, marry Miss Ashford, as you should have done in the first place, and I'll forget your temporary lapse in judgment." "No, don't be a fool. This farce of a marriage was never legitimate. The girl's father sold her to avoid his debts, and you accepted out of spite. That's not a legal union. That's a transaction that can be dissolved. We're married under territorial law. Judge Reynolds performed the ceremony. 200 witnesses saw it happen. Judge Reynolds is a drunk who'd sign anything for the right price." Malcolm gestured to the woman standing behind him. "Judge Hartwell, however, has the authority to overturn his decisions when fraud is involved." The judge stepped forward. She was a severe-looking woman in her 50s, carrying a leather case that presumably held legal documents. "Mr. Mercer, I've reviewed the circumstances of your marriage. There are several irregularities that warrant investigation." "What irregularities?" Caleb demanded. "The bride was substituted at the last moment without proper notification or revised contracts. The marriage occurred under duress." "I wasn't under duress," Norah said. "Your father offered you as compensation for his daughter's breach of contract. That constitutes financial coercion." "I made my own choice." "Did you?" Judge Hartwell opened her case and withdrew papers. "I have a sworn statement from Thomas Hale stating he pressured you into accepting to save the family from ruin, that you had no real choice in the matter." Nora's blood went cold. "My father said that?" "Signed and notarized yesterday." Judge Hartwell's expression was professionally neutral. "Combined with witness statements describing the circumstances as desperate and coerced, there's sufficient cause to question the marriage's validity." "This is insane," Caleb said. "We've been married for 4 months. We've built a life together. You can't just—" "I can, actually." Judge Hartwell looked almost sympathetic. "Mr. Mercer, I understand this is difficult, but the law exists to protect people from entering contracts under duress. If Miss Hale, Mrs. Mercer, was forced into this marriage by her father's debts and your family's demands, then the contract is voidable." "I wasn't forced," Norah insisted. "I chose to marry him, under extreme pressure and with limited options. That's not the same as free consent." Malcolm smiled, and Norah wanted to hit him. "As I said, we can handle this quietly. Caleb, you sign the annulment papers. The girl returns to her family with a modest settlement to compensate for any inconvenience. You marry Miss Ashford within the month. Everything returns to how it should have been. And if I refuse, then I proceed with the legal challenge, which I'll win because I have better lawyers and more influence than you do. And when I win, the annulment happens anyway, except this time the girl gets nothing, and you lose half the ranch for wasting the court's time with a frivolous defense." "Half the ranch?" One of the lawyers stepped forward. "The property settlement agreement your father signed when you took over operation of this land includes a clause allowing for reclamation of assets if you prove unable to manage them responsibly. Entering an invalid marriage and refusing to correct it could be considered gross mismanagement." Caleb looked like he'd been slapped. "You'd take half my land because I won't divorce my wife?" "I'd reclaim my investment because you've demonstrated you can't be trusted to make sound decisions." Malcolm's expression was stone. "One way or another, this marriage ends today. The only question is how much you lose in the process." Norah felt the world closing in. Malcolm had thought of everything. Every angle, every threat, every possible resistance. He'd built a trap so thorough that fighting would only make things worse. "Can we have a moment?" Caleb's voice was strained. "Alone, to discuss this." "You have 10 minutes. Malcolm checked his pocket watch. "Then I need an answer." Caleb pulled Norah into the office and closed the door. For a long moment, they just stood there, the weight of Malcolm's ultimatum crushing them both. "He's going to win," Norah said quietly. "Isn't he?" "I don't know." If you fight him, you lose half the ranch. If you don't fight him, you lose me. Either way, he wins. Caleb paced the small room like a caged animal. There has to be a way. Some legal argument, some technicality. There isn't. He's been planning this too long. He's covered every possibility. So what, we just give up? Let him tear us apart? No. Norah's voice broke. I give up. I sign whatever papers they want and walk away. You keep your land, marry Caroline Ashford, and build the life your father wants for you. Absolutely not. Caleb, be reasonable, huh? I'm done being reasonable. He stopped pacing, faced her directly. I'm done letting my father control my life. I'm done making decisions based on what he wants instead of what I want. You'll lose everything. I'll lose half a ranch. That's not everything. He moved to her, took her hands. You're everything. This, us, that's what matters. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have. My father wants me to choose between this land and you. Fine. I choose you. The words should have filled her with joy. Instead, they filled her with dread. And then what? Norah pulled her hands away. We fight the annulment. You lose half the ranch, and we're stuck here trying to survive on what's left? How long before you resent me for it? How long before you look at me and see the reason you lost your inheritance? I would never... You don't know that. Nobody knows that. Love doesn't survive poverty and bitterness, Caleb. I've seen it happen too many times. So you'd rather leave, let my father win? I'd rather you have a future, even if I'm not in it. The silence that followed was devastating. Caleb stared at her like she'd struck him. You're serious? I'm trying to be practical. You're trying to run away, just like Vivian did. The comparison landed like a physical blow. That's not fair, isn't it? The first time things get difficult, you're ready to bolt, to sacrifice what we have because you don't believe it's worth fighting for. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're giving up, again, like you always do. I don't always... You disappeared your entire life, Norah. Made yourself invisible because it was easier than being seen. And now that someone actually sees you, actually wants you, you're trying to disappear again. You don't understand. I understand that I'm standing here telling you I love you, that I choose you, that I'm willing to lose everything to keep you, and you're telling me to marry someone else. Caleb's voice cracked. What part of that am I misunderstanding? Norah felt tears streaming down her face. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need you to fight, to believe that what we have is worth the cost. And if we lose anyway, if we fight and lose everything and end up with nothing, then we have nothing together, which is still better than having everything without you. A knock on the door interrupted them. Malcolm's voice came through, impatient. Time's up. I need your answer. Caleb looked at Norah, and she saw the choice reflected in his eyes, the decision that would determine everything. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. It was the question she'd been afraid of, because the answer required her to believe in something she'd never believed in before, that she was worth fighting for. I want... She stopped, tried again. I want to fight, but I'm terrified. So am I. What if we lose? What if we win? The possibility hung between them, fragile and impossible, and somehow real. Norah wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, tried to find whatever strength Martha had seen in her that morning. All right, she said. We fight. Caleb's expression transformed. He pulled her close, kissed her hard enough to bruise, then released her and opened the door. Malcolm stood in the hallway, lawyers flanking him, Judge Hartwell waiting with papers in hand. Well? Malcolm demanded. No, Caleb said simply. No? No, I won't sign your annulment. No, I won't divorce my wife. No, I won't marry Caroline Ashford or anyone else you choose for me. The answer is no. Malcolm's face went dark red. You're making a mistake. Probably. But it's my mistake to make. I'll take half your land. I'll drag you through every court in the territory. I'll make sure everyone knows you chose a nobody over your own family. Do it. Caleb's voice was steady. Take the land. Drag me to court. Tell everyone whatever story makes you feel powerful. But you're not taking my wife. You'd throw away your inheritance for this girl? I'd throw away everything for this woman. There's a difference. Judge Hartwell cleared her throat. Mr. Mercer, I should inform you that fighting this will be expensive. Court costs, legal fees. I don't care. You should care, one of the lawyers interjected. Even if you win, which is unlikely, the process could take months, years potentially, during which time your ranch operation will be under constant legal scrutiny, every decision questioned, every transaction examined. Then I'll deal with it. Malcolm stepped forward, voice dropping to something dangerous. You ungrateful fool! I gave you everything. This land, this house, every opportunity you've ever had. And this is how you repay me? By spitting on the family name for some common girl who was only there because her sister had better sense? Careful, Caleb said quietly. Why? Afraid I'll hurt her feelings? She knows what she is. Everyone knows what she is. A replacement, a spare. The girl nobody wanted until you were desperate enough to... Caleb's fist connected with his father's jaw. Malcolm staggered back, blood spraying from his split lip. The lawyers froze. Judge Hartwell gasped, and Norah watched in shock as Caleb stood over his father, hand still clenched in a fist. Say one more word about my wife, Caleb said, voice deadly calm, and I'll hit you again. Malcolm touched his bleeding mouth, staring at his son like he'd never seen him before. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. I'll destroy you. Everything you've built, everything you think you own. I'll tear it all down. Try. Caleb didn't back down. But leave her alone. Whatever fight you have is with me, not her. Malcolm looked at Norah with pure hatred. You did this. You turned my son against me. No, Norah said, finding her voice. You did that yourself. Years ago, probably. Caleb just finally noticed. For a moment, she thought Malcolm might actually hit her. His hand twitched, his face contorted with rage. But Judge Hartwell stepped between them. Gentlemen and lady, I think we should all take a moment to calm down. She looked genuinely disturbed. Mr. Mercer Sr., perhaps we should discuss this matter in town, at my chambers, where cooler heads can prevail. There's nothing to discuss. Malcolm dabbed at his bleeding lip with a handkerchief. I'm proceeding with the legal challenge, and when I win, I'm taking everything. He turned to Caleb one last time. You've chosen poorly, boy. I hope she's worth it. She is. Malcolm's laugh was bitter. We'll see how you feel when you're broke and landless with a wife who despises you for ruining her life. He stormed out, lawyers scrambling to follow. Judge Hartwell gathered her papers with obvious discomfort. Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer, you'll be receiving official notice of the proceedings within the week. I recommend you retain legal counsel immediately. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, I hope you understand the gravity of what you're facing. Your father has significant resources and influence. This won't be an easy fight. We understand, Caleb said. After they left, Norah and Caleb stood in the sudden silence, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. You hit your father, Norah said. Yeah. I've never seen you violent before. He insulted you. I wasn't going to stand there and let him. Caleb stopped, examined his bruised knuckles. I'm not sorry. I didn't ask you to be. They looked at each other, and suddenly Norah started laughing. Wild, slightly hysterical laughter that she couldn't control. What's funny? Caleb asked, confused. All of it. This whole impossible situation. Your father's face when you hit him. The fact that we just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the territory with nothing but stubbornness and hope. She wiped tears from her eyes. We're completely insane. Probably. Caleb started laughing too. But at least we're insane together. The laughter faded into something more serious, more real. What do we do now? Norah asked. Now? We prepare for the fight of our lives. We need a lawyer, a good one. I know a few who might help, but they'll be expensive. We have some money saved, from the timber sale and the water rights. Norah's mind was already calculating. It won't be enough for a long court battle, but it's a start. We'll figure it out. Caleb pulled her close. We figured out everything else. They stood there holding each other while the morning sun slanted through the windows, warming the house they'd built together. Outside, they heard Caroline Ashford's carriage pulling away. Apparently, she'd decided to leave with Malcolm rather than witness any more family drama. Martha appeared in the hallway, having obviously witnessed at least part of the confrontation. Well, she said, that was something. I'm sorry you had to see that, Norah said. Don't apologize. Been waiting years for someone to hit that man. Martha actually smiled. You two need anything? Coffee, Caleb said. Very strong coffee. And maybe some ice for your hand, Norah added. As Martha bustled off to the kitchen, Caleb examined his bruised knuckles again. Worth it. Was it? Absolutely. I've wanted to do that since I was 15 years old. Norah touched his face gently. We're really doing this, fighting him, risking everything, having second thoughts. She considered the question honestly. Was she having second thoughts? A few hours ago, she'd been ready to walk away, ready to sacrifice herself to save him from his father's wrath. But something had shifted during that confrontation. She'd watched Caleb stand up to Malcolm, watched him choose her over money, over land, over family approval, watched him punch his own father rather than let him insult her. And she'd realized something crucial. This wasn't about being someone's first choice or second choice anymore. This was about being chosen, period, being valued, being worth fighting for. No second thoughts, she said, but I am terrified. Good. Me too. Means we're taking this seriously. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. They hired a lawyer, Marcus Webb, a sharp-minded man from Silver Creek, who'd made his reputation taking on powerful families and occasionally winning. He was expensive but good, and he looked at their case with cautious optimism. The annulment claim is weak, he said, reviewing their documents. You were both of legal age, both consented verbally in front of witnesses. The marriage was consummated. Your father-in-law's argument about coercion is circumstantial at best. So we can win? Norah asked. I didn't say that. I said his annulment claim is weak, but he's also threatening to reclaim land based on the property settlement agreement. That's a separate issue. Can he actually do that? Caleb asked. Webb read through the settlement papers Malcolm had provided. His expression grew grave. Possibly. This clause here, about reclaiming assets due to mismanagement, it's vague enough that a sympathetic judge might interpret it broadly. He's arguing that entering an invalid marriage constitutes mismanagement. But the marriage isn't invalid. We know that. But until a court rules definitively, it's contested. And during contested periods, he might be able to freeze your assets or petition for temporary custody of portions of the land. Norah felt sick. How long could this take? 6 months minimum. Could be longer if he appeals. And if he's serious about making this expensive for you, Webb trailed off meaningfully. We don't have the resources for a year-long legal battle, Caleb admitted. Then we need to force a quick resolution. Get it in front of a judge as soon as possible, present a clear case, and hope we get a fair ruling. Webb looked at them seriously. But you should know, Malcolm Mercer has friends in every courthouse between here and the territorial capital. This won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever was, Norah thought. They threw themselves into building their defense, collected witness statements from people who'd been at the wedding, gathered financial records showing the ranch's improved performance under their joint management, documented everything they'd built together over the past 4 months. Martha testified that Norah had never seemed coerced or unhappy. Sarah confirmed that the household ran better than it had in years. Even Peterson, the neighboring rancher, provided a statement praising Norah's business acumen and Caleb's sound decision-making. But Malcolm was building his case too. Word came back through various channels that he was painting Norah as a gold digger who'd manipulated her way into the family, that he was finding witnesses willing to say the wedding had been a farce, that Caleb had been acting irrationally, that the whole thing needed to be dissolved for everyone's benefit. He even got Vivian to provide a statement. Webb showed them the document, his expression apologetic. Vivian claimed that Norah had always been jealous of her, had seized the opportunity to steal Vivian's life out of spite, had pressured their father into offering her as a substitute bride. It's all lies, Norah said, reading the poison her sister had written. Doesn't matter if it's true. Matters if it's believable. Webb tucked the paper away. We need to counter this narrative, show that you're not the desperate opportunist he's claiming. How? By being exactly who you are, smart, capable, genuine. Webb looked at her seriously. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, you need to tell your story. Honestly. Let the judge see that you're a real person, not the caricature Malcolm's creating. The court date was set for late September. a hearing before Judge Hartwell and a panel of territorial magistrates in Black Ridge. It would be public, Webb warned them. The whole town would attend, maybe the whole territory. Malcolm's making this into a spectacle on purpose, Webb explained. He wants everyone to see him crush you publicly, wants to make an example out of what happens when someone defies him. Then we'll give them a different show, Caleb said grimly. The night before the hearing, Norah couldn't sleep. She lay beside Caleb in the darkness, listening to his breathing, trying to memorize the feel of being beside him in case tomorrow took it all away. "You awake?" he asked quietly. "Yeah. Me too." They lay in silence for a moment. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Caleb said, "I want you to know. I don't regret any of this. Not the wedding, not the fight with my father, not any of it. Even if we lose, even then. Because these past few months with you have been the best of my life. And nobody can take that away. Not my father, not the court, nobody." Norah rolled over to face him. In the dim moonlight coming through the window, she could just make out his features. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I've said it enough, but I do. I love you completely." "I know." He pulled her close. "And tomorrow, we're going to make sure everyone else knows it too." They made love slowly, tenderly, like people savoring something precious that might not last. And afterwards, they held each other until dawn broke gray and cold over the prairie. The day of reckoning had arrived. The territorial courthouse in Black Ridge was packed to capacity by the time Norah and Caleb arrived. Every pew filled with ranchers, businessmen, shopkeepers, and curious townsfolk who'd come to watch the Mercer family drama unfold. The air felt thick with anticipation and judgment. Malcolm sat in the front row on the opposite side, flanked by his lawyers and looking supremely confident. He dressed for the occasion, expensive suit, polished boots, the silver watch chain that screamed old money and power. When Norah and Caleb entered, he didn't even glance their way. Judge Hartwell sat at the bench with two territorial magistrates, all three looking properly solemn. Webb had warned them that Hartwell had already shown her bias during Malcolm's visit to the ranch, but the magistrates were unknowns. Their entire future might depend on two strangers who'd never met them before today. "All rise," the bailiff called. The hearing began with procedural formalities that Norah barely heard over the pounding of her heart. Then Malcolm's lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Harrison, stood to present their case. "Your Honors, we're here today to address a fraudulent marriage that has caused significant harm to the Mercer family and their business interests. On the morning of April 15th, Caleb Mercer was scheduled to marry Vivian Hale in a carefully arranged union between two prominent ranching families. When Miss Hale failed to appear, her father, Thomas Hale, offered his younger daughter Norah as a substitute bride to avoid financial consequences. Harrison gestured dramatically at Norah. This young woman was thrust into a marriage she did not freely choose, coerced by her father's debts and the public pressure of the moment. And my client's son, acting out of anger and humiliation, accepted this arrangement without proper consideration of the legal and ethical implications. "That's not what happened," Norah whispered to Webb. "Let him finish," Webb murmured back. "We'll get our turn." Harrison continued, painting a picture of two desperate people making a rash decision that should never have been binding. He presented Thomas Hale's statement claiming he'd pressured Norah. He submitted testimony from wedding guests describing the scene as chaotic and coerced. He even brought up Vivian's statement about Norah's supposed jealousy and manipulation. The marriage was never legitimate, Harrison concluded. It was a transaction born of desperation, executed under duress, and maintained through stubbornness rather than genuine affection. We ask this court to annul the union and allow both parties to move forward with their lives. One of the magistrates, a stern-faced man named Morrison, leaned forward. "Mr. Harrison, the marriage was consummated, was it not? That typically establishes legitimacy regardless of the initial circumstances. The consummation claim is unverified and unprovable, Your Honor. But even if true, it doesn't negate the fundamental illegitimacy of the contract. A coerced agreement remains coerced, even if the parties later attempt to make the best of it." Morrison sat back, apparently satisfied with that answer. Webb stood when it was their turn, and Norah felt her stomach clench with anxiety. Everything depended on what happened next. "Your Honors, my clients don't dispute that their wedding day was unconventional. But unconventional doesn't mean invalid, and complicated circumstances don't equal coercion. Webb walked to the center of the courtroom. The opposing counsel wants you to believe that Norah Mercer is a helpless victim and that Caleb Mercer is an impulsive fool. Neither characterization is accurate. He presented their evidence methodically. The signed marriage certificate, testimony from witnesses who'd heard Norah verbally consent, financial records showing the ranch's dramatic improvement under their joint management, statements from Martha, Sarah, and Peterson attesting to the strength and legitimacy of their marriage. This isn't a case of fraud or coercion, Webb argued. This is a case of a powerful man who's angry that his son made an independent decision. Malcolm Mercer wanted to control who his son married, and when that didn't happen, he decided to use the courts to undo a legal marriage out of spite. Malcolm's face went red, but he didn't speak. Webb turned to Judge Hartwell and the magistrates. My clients asked this court to recognize what everyone in this room can clearly see, that they are legally married, that they've built a genuine partnership, and that dissolving their union would be a gross miscarriage of justice. Judge Hartwell cleared her throat. Mr. Webb, the court understands your position. However, the question remains whether Miss Hale, Mrs. Mercer, entered this marriage of her own free will or whether she was coerced by circumstance. She can speak for herself, Your Honor. If the court would permit, Mrs. Mercer would like to testify. Norah's heart nearly stopped. They'd discussed this possibility, but she'd hoped it wouldn't come to it. The thought of standing before the entire town and defending her marriage felt overwhelming. Caleb squeezed her hand under the table. You don't have to, he whispered. But she did have to. Because if she stayed silent, Malcolm's version of events would be the only one the court heard. I'll do it, she said quietly. Webb helped her stand. Your Honors, I call Norah Mercer to testify. The walk to the witness stand felt like miles. Every eye in the courtroom followed her. She heard whispers, saw the judgment on familiar faces, felt the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down. She was sworn in and took her seat, hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Webb approached gently. Mrs. Mercer, can you tell the court in your own words what happened on the morning of April 15th? Norah took a breath. My sister Vivian ran away the night before her wedding to Caleb. She left a note saying she'd found something better. The next morning, my father took our family to the church because he didn't know what else to do. When we arrived, he had to tell everyone that Vivian was gone. What happened next? Malcolm Mercer, Caleb's father, demanded compensation. He said my father had breached the marriage contract and that he'd sue for damages. My father panicked. He offered me as a replacement bride. Did your father force you to accept? This was the critical question, the one that would determine everything. Norah looked at Malcolm, then at Caleb, then at the packed courtroom full of people waiting to judge her. No, she said clearly. He didn't force me. Harrison was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, we have a sworn statement from Thomas Hale contradicting. Let her finish, Morrison said sharply. Norah continued. My father offered. Malcolm rejected me. The whole church was laughing at us. At me, specifically. I was humiliated and angry and terrified. Then Caleb said he'd marry me anyway, and I had a choice to make. What choice was that? I could refuse and watch my family's reputation collapse completely. Or I could accept and at least salvage something from the disaster my sister created. Norah met Webb's eyes. Was it a perfect choice? No. Was I under pressure? Absolutely. But was I forced? No. I chose to marry Caleb because it seemed like the best option available to me at that moment. And now, 4 months later, how do you feel about that choice? It's the best decision I've ever made. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Why? Webb asked. Because Caleb has treated me with more respect and kindness than anyone in my entire life. Because we've built something real together. Because I wake up every morning grateful that I took a chance on something uncertain instead of accepting the nothing I'd always had. Harrison stood again. Your Honor, I'd like to cross-examine the witness. Proceed. Harrison approached with the confidence of a man who thought he held all the cards. Mrs. Mercer, you testified that you married my client's son because it was the best option available. That suggests you settled for what you could get, not what you truly wanted, correct? I settled for a chance at something better. There's a difference. But you didn't choose Caleb Mercer because you loved him. You chose him because you were desperate. I chose him because he was the only person who'd ever chosen me first. And yes, maybe that started as desperation. But it became love. Real love. The kind that grows from actually knowing someone instead of just wanting what they can give you. Harrison's smile was condescending. How convenient. You're in love with the wealthy rancher you accidentally married. How romantic.
He's not wealthy anymore, is he? Norah's voice hardened.
Your client is threatening to take half the ranch. If we win this case, we'll be facing years of legal costs and financial strain. I could walk away right now with a settlement. Malcolm offered me money to leave quietly. If I was here for wealth, I'd have taken it. Perhaps you're simply holding out for more. Or perhaps I'm here because I love my husband and I'm willing to fight for our marriage, even when people like you try to reduce it to a transaction. Harrison's smile faded. He'd expected her to be meek, uncertain, easy to rattle. Instead, she was meeting him head on. Let's talk about your sister, Harrison said, switching tactics. Vivian provided a statement claiming you were always jealous of her, that you seized the opportunity to steal her life. Any truth to that? My sister has lied about a lot of things. That's just one more. So you deny being jealous? I deny that I married Caleb to hurt Vivian. She didn't want him. She made that abundantly clear when she ran away. I didn't steal anything from her. I accepted something she'd already thrown away. But you must have resented her, the beautiful sister who got all the attention while you were overlooked. Of course I resented her. Norah's honesty seemed to surprise him. I spent my entire childhood being invisible while she absorbed all the light. But resentment doesn't mean I married Caleb out of spite. It means I understood what an opportunity looked like when it finally appeared. Harrison paused, clearly trying to find a new angle of attack. Mrs. Mercer, your father's statement claims he pressured you into accepting the marriage. Are you calling your own father a liar? I'm saying my father signed whatever Malcolm Mercer told him to sign, just like he offered me up at that church. Not because he wanted to help me, but because he wanted to save himself. Norah's voice wavered slightly. My father has never put my interests first. Why would he start now? The courtroom went very quiet. One final question, Harrison said. If this marriage is annulled and you're offered a generous settlement, would you accept it? No? Why not? Because my marriage isn't for sale. Because love isn't something you can put a price on and buy off. Because I'd rather fight for something real than accept money for giving up. Harrison looked at the judges. No further questions. As Norah returned to her seat, her legs shaking, Caleb took her hand again. You were incredible, he whispered. I was terrified. You were both. Webb called Caleb to testify next. Harrison tried the same tactics, painting him as impulsive, angry, acting out against his father rather than making a rational choice. But Caleb didn't waver. Yes, I was angry at my father, he said. I've been angry at him for most of my life, but I didn't marry Norah to spite him. I married her because in that moment, standing at that altar, I saw someone who needed help and I could provide it. And then I got to know her, really know her. And I fell in love with who she actually is. Not who I expected her to be, but who she really is. Smart, strong, loyal. Everything I didn't know I needed. Even if it cost you half your ranch? Harrison pressed. The ranch is land and cattle and business. Norah is my future. If I have to choose, I choose her, every single time. Malcolm stood abruptly. Your Honors, may I address the court? Judge Hartwell looked surprised. Mr. Mercer Sr., you're not testifying. I know what I am. I'm the father watching his son throw away everything I built for him, and I need to speak. The magistrates conferred briefly, then Morrison nodded. You may approach. Malcolm walked to the center of the courtroom, commanding attention the way he always had. I built an empire in this territory, started with nothing, and created something that employs hundreds of people and feeds thousands of cattle. I did that through discipline, strategy, and making smart alliances. He gestured at Caleb. I raised my son to understand that our family's strength comes from careful planning, from choosing the right partners, from thinking long-term instead of acting on emotion. Then on one morning, he threw all of that away, married a girl he didn't know out of wounded pride. And when I tried to correct this mistake, he refused, punched me, chose her over his own blood. Malcolm's voice grew heavy. I'm not here out of spite. I'm here because I love my son, and I'm trying to save him from a decision that will ruin his life. He turned to face Norah directly. You seem like a decent enough girl. Smart, apparently. But you're not right for him. You don't come from the same world. You don't understand what it takes to maintain a legacy like ours. And eventually, that difference will tear you apart. You're wrong, Norah said quietly. Am I? Tell me honestly. Do you really believe you can make him happy long term? That you're enough to sustain a marriage when the money runs out and the romance fades, and you're just two people who barely knew each other stuck in a life neither of you really chose? The question hung in the air, cruel in its directness. Norah stood. She wasn't supposed to speak out of turn, but she couldn't stay silent. You want honesty? Here it is. I don't know if I can make Caleb happy forever. Nobody knows that. Marriage isn't about certainty. It's about choosing to try, every day. Even when it's hard, even when powerful men try to tear you apart because they can't control you. She walked toward Malcolm, aware of every eye on her but no longer caring. You built an empire. Congratulations. But you did it by controlling everyone around you, by treating your own son like a business asset instead of a person. And now he's finally standing up to you, finally choosing his own path, and you can't handle it. You don't know what you're talking about, Malcolm said coldly. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I spent my whole life being controlled by people who thought they knew better than me. My father deciding I wasn't worth investing in, my sister treating me like furniture, everyone around me making choices about my life without asking what I wanted. Norah's voice grew stronger. Then I married Caleb, and for the first time someone asked what I thought, what I needed, what I wanted to build. He didn't try to control me. He partnered with me. And we created something together that's stronger than anything either of us could have built alone. She turned to address the entire courtroom now. You all watched me stand at that altar 4 months ago. You saw me as the pathetic replacement bride, the sister nobody wanted, and maybe that's what I was in that moment. But that's not who I am now. I'm the woman who saved Caleb's ranch from bankruptcy, who reorganized his accounts and renegotiated his contracts, and turned a failing operation into a profitable one. I'm the woman who stood beside him when his own father threatened to destroy everything he'd built. I'm the woman he chose to love, not because I was convenient, but because we built something real together. The courtroom was absolutely silent. So judge me if you want. Call me a gold digger or an opportunist or whatever makes you feel superior. But don't tell me I don't belong in this marriage, because I've earned my place here more than most people earn anything in their entire lives. She sat down, heart pounding, suddenly aware of what she'd just done. Judge Hartwell looked stunned. Morrison was whispering to the other magistrate. Harrison seemed at a loss for words. Finally, Morrison spoke. Is there any other testimony to be presented? Webb stood. Just one more witness, Your Honor. I call Thomas Hale. Norah's head snapped up. Her father? Webb hadn't mentioned this. Thomas Hale shuffled to the witness stand, looking older and more worn than Norah remembered. He avoided her eyes as he was sworn in. Webb approached carefully. Mr. Hale, you provided a statement to Malcolm Mercer's lawyers claiming you pressured your daughter into marrying Caleb Mercer. Is that statement accurate? Thomas was silent for a long moment. No, he finally said. Harrison shot to his feet. Your Honor, the witness already provided sworn testimony. Let him speak, Morrison said. Thomas continued, voice rough. Malcolm Mercer came to my home 3 weeks ago. Said if I signed a statement saying I'd coerced Norah, he'd forgive my outstanding debts to his bank. $15,000. I was desperate, so I signed. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hartwell had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. But the truth is, Thomas said, looking at Norah for the first time, I did offer her up that day at the church, but I didn't force her to accept. She made her own choice, and it's the only good decision anyone in our family has made in years. Why are you testifying now? Webb asked. You could lose that debt forgiveness. But because I've watched my daughter build a life I could never give her, and I've watched her husband treat her better than I ever did. And I realized, Thomas's voice cracked, I realized that trying to destroy that just to save myself would make me worse than the coward I already am. He looked at Malcolm. Keep the debt. Take whatever you want. But leave my daughter alone. She deserves better than being used as a pawn by men like us. Thomas stepped down without waiting to be dismissed. As he passed Norah's seat, he stopped. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything. Then he was gone. walking out of the courthouse and out of her life. Judge Hartwell and the magistrates conferred for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, Morrison stood to deliver their decision. This court has heard extensive testimony regarding the marriage of Caleb and Norah Mercer. We've heard arguments about coercion, fraud, and legitimacy, and we've observed two people who clearly love each other fighting to preserve their union against overwhelming pressure. He paused, and Norah held her breath. The petition for annulment is denied. The marriage stands. The courtroom exploded again. Norah felt tears streaming down her face as Caleb pulled her into his arms. Webb was grinning. Martha, sitting in the back, was openly crying, but Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court finds that Malcolm Mercer's petition was brought in bad faith, motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate legal concern. His attempt to coerce testimony from Thomas Hale constitutes witness tampering. Therefore, we are dismissing with prejudice all claims regarding property reclamation or asset division. Malcolm's face went white. Mr. Mercer Sr., you came here seeking to control your son's life through legal manipulation. Instead, you've demonstrated precisely why he was right to distance himself from your influence. This court will not be a tool for your vendetta. Morrison looked at Caleb and Norah. Your marriage is legal and binding. May it bring you both happiness. He banged the gavel one final time. This hearing is adjourned. Malcolm stormed out without a word, his lawyers scrambling after him. The crowd began to disperse, some people offering congratulations, others simply staring. Norah couldn't process it all. They'd won. Actually won. We should celebrate, Caleb said, laughing through his own tears. Dinner in town, champagne, whatever you want. I want to go home, Norah said. Our home, just us. Then that's what we'll do. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon sun, exhausted and exhilarated and still processing what had happened. The land spread out around them, golden and endless, and for the first time it felt truly theirs. Not Malcolm's, not her father's. Theirs. That night, Caleb found Norah in the bedroom that had once been prepared for Vivian. She was standing by the window, looking out at the prairie. What are you thinking? He asked. That none of this turned out how anyone expected. Is that good or bad? It's perfect. In a messy, complicated, completely imperfect way. She turned to face him. I spent my whole life trying to be invisible because I thought being seen meant being hurt. But you saw me anyway, and instead of hurting me, you chose me. Caleb crossed the room and pulled her close. I'll keep choosing you every day, for the rest of our lives. Even when I'm difficult? Especially then. Even when money's tight and the ranch struggles and we're exhausted and frustrated? Every single time. She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude. Relief. Love so deep it scared her. When they finally broke apart, Caleb smiled. So what do we do now? We've fought off my father, proven our marriage is real. What comes next? We live, Norah said simply. We run this ranch and build our future and figure out the rest as we go. Together. Together, Caleb agreed. And in the bedroom that had once held decorations meant for someone else, in the house they'd turned into a home, in the marriage that had started as a transaction and become something real, they began the next chapter of their story. Not because it was perfect, not because it was easy, but because they'd chosen each other, and that choice mattered more than anything else. Outside, the prairie stretched toward the horizon, vast and unforgiving and full of possibility. The frontier demanded strength from those who tried to tame it. But Norah had learned something important over the past months. She'd never been weak. She'd just been waiting for someone to notice her strength. And now that someone had, now that she'd noticed it herself, there was nothing she couldn't face. The forgotten sister had become the woman who changed everything, not through beauty or charm or being chosen first, but through loyalty, intelligence, and the quiet courage to fight for what she'd built with her own hands. Some stories were about destiny, about fate bringing people together in perfect ways. This wasn't one of those stories. This was a story about two imperfect people who made an imperfect choice and turned it into something worth fighting for. About finding love in unexpected places and building futures from broken beginnings. About learning that sometimes being second choice doesn't matter, as long as you end up being the final choice, the only choice that counts. And as Norah stood beside her husband in the home they'd created together, watching the sun set over land they'd fought to keep, She realized something fundamental. She hadn't needed to be chosen first. She'd needed to choose herself. Everything else had followed from that.